Welcome to the Quilt Addicts Anonymous Beginner Quilting video tutorial series. I have a very special guest with me today because we are talking about fabrics. I've got Ken Gamache, the president of QT Fabrics, who is sponsoring this video tutorial series. So first of all, thank you for making this possible.
Thank you, and you're welcome, Stephanie. Thank you very much.
All right, we are going to be teaching people how to quilt in this video tutorial series, but today we're talking all about fabric. You're not just a guy in a suit. You have spent your entire career in the fabric industry, starting as the guy who cleaned the print rollers, right?
That's correct, way back in 1978 when I was only 11 years old. So, but anyways.
Yes, we're aging very
no jokes, okay.
here.
so in 1978, cleaning the copper rollers, and that was my humble beginning, starting on a midnight shift, working overnight, and getting nice and dirty with all the inks and all the dust and whatnot and the grease. So that was my humble beginnings, yes.
So you've kind of seen how fabric has changed and the quality that's available over that course of time as well.
Yes, during my tenure at my career, I've shaded fabric, I've colorized formulations, I worked in aging and finishing, worked through the distribution networks, and so I've seen an evolution through the last 4 decades that we'll be talking about, yes.
Good deal. So we're here today to talk about the fabric you should be using in your quilt. And obviously if you go to a big fabric store that sells more than just quilting fabric, you're going to find lots of different things. But we're going to kind of zero in on the things you might find at a quilt shop. And because you don't want things like knits, you could do it, but you need to stabilize it first, and that's not a beginner project. You need to, you know, get comfortable with the basics first and then move on for it. But one story that I kind of like to tell, when I was originally teaching beginner quilting, I was doing it at not my quilt shop, but another one, and someone had like a top-of-the-line machine and fabric from a big box store, and it was marketed as quilting fabric, but it just isn't the same type of quality that you would get from a quilt shop, because they all kind of have different things that they require. And she had such a difficult time with it because the fabric wasn't holding its shape, and so we were having to spray starch everything, and then it still wasn't turning out the right size even though she was cutting correctly. And it would have just been much easier had she started off with something that was going to stay the right size. And that's what good quilting cotton is going to do. When you cut it, it's going to stay your 6.5 inch square, and it's not going to stretch out of place on you, and it's going to wash well. So QT Fabrics, and over its course and history, has done fabrics for quilt shops and then also for the chains, right?
Yes, we have. Actually, QT Fabrics is part of a company called Cranston. So that's our corporation. And through the 50s and actually right and through now, at this period, we also supply fabrics to the chains, the big boxes, and we're called VIP fabrics. We're getting out of the chains, so we are no longer in Joann's or Walmart. We have a few SKUs in Hobby Lobby. But the quality, as you're alluding to, is quite different. Quilting quality fabric, traditionally in shops, is produced on what we call 60 squares, 60 thread count, warp and fill. It is very important, number one, that you have, at least we do 60 by 60. And that's what most of the majority of the quilting suppliers are using, 60 by 60. And also within the 60 thread count itself, the threads are much thicker. The other difference between chains and quilting fabric quality is the wet colors. You need the wider thread that I mentioned earlier. The wet fiber active colors actually dyes the individual threads. And so that's a big difference, as opposed to chains. A majority of the time they're using pigments, and pigments on a very thin thread, and it's painted as opposed to dyeing the fibers itself. So that's a big difference, first of all, because you're getting a pigment print, and it's stiff, and it's on very thin fabric, which makes it see-through, and so it makes a much different type of quality. That quilt, you wouldn't want to have that type of feel and opacity in looking through the fabric itself. So you have the threads being thinner, you have pigment printing, And also the finish, very important. The quilting quality has a nice soft hand, and it's typically silicone or silicone that makes it softer. On pigment printing, you could never get the glue or the adhesive that keeps the paint on top of the fabric, the pigment colorant, to be soft, because it's just a glue and it's bindy in a sense, so you can't have it finished properly.
And that's mostly a cost-saving measure, right? I mean, these chains, they have a price that they need to hold so that they can make margins and be profitable. And in order to do that, then you just can't provide the same type of quality, right?
That's exactly right. All the steps I just mentioned earlier about the thinness of the thread, the finishing, or the pigments are all cost-saving processes that helps the plant, first of all, and helps supposedly a supplier, but that's really driven by the chains. They want to have the lowest, cheapest product they possibly can to drive maybe the mass consumers that aren't interested in all the higher quality goods that are here in your shop.
And I know that there's this temptation to, you're not sure if you're going to like it, and so it's like, okay, well, let's start with something that isn't that expensive, and then if I don't like it, then I haven't spent a ton of money. And that's why in our beginner quilting class here at the shop, and then also online, if you download the pattern that goes with this, you're going to get a special coupon code that you can use to get the supplies for your first quilt. And that way you can still start out with the good stuff, but at a little bit of a discount, because quite honestly, we know that if you have a good time working with the fabric, then you're going to come back to us and get more of it. So it's worth it to us to make that deal for you guys.
Yes, it's important for consumers to listen to very closely what you had mentioned, because you don't want to have a bad experience right off the bat and think that sewing and quilting is not going to be something you want to go forward with. You're making an investment in your time, valuable time, so you might as well make the investment in the fabric that's going to work the best for you, especially in the beginning, and it's going to feel good to you, and it's going to have a better long-term result in the future.
Especially, I know when I started quilting, I was young and my friends were having babies, and so that's what I was getting. And baby quilts are washed a lot, and if you have something that's going to start falling apart before that kid is even out of diapers, then that's not. It's going to be so sad. I mean, that's something that you want to keep and pass down, and not, fall apart before the kid's out of diapers. So we have some fabric with us. This is some of the fabric that is used in the quilt. Obviously, you can't see or you can't touch this at home, but it's very soft, and that's what you should look for when you're at a shop, right?
Yes.
And also, you can't see through it. So if I hold this up, I could use this as a garment without a lining, and it would be fine. White, not so much, but that's going to be the case with any white fabric. But it really is, it feels good, it's nice and it's thick enough, you can't see through it, it's not going to stretch on you, which is what you want. You don't want your fabrics to be stretching out of place.
That's correct. And so it's very important as a supplier, QT specifically, since we produced fabric for 200 years. When we went and had to go overseas and close our plants down, we actually sent our technical team to the plant we're using in Korea to have that feel, that heft, to have that final finished product be something you are proud to own. And so that was a very important factor. And so as QT, as a supplier of fabrics, we think there are about 40 different competitors in this field, and each of us have different standards. And so it's critical, or we think is very important, if you're making a quilt with coordinated fabrics, at least visually by color, if it's not QT, at least try to get the same supplier and vendor. And you'd see that on the board ends, or at least on the selvage, who's making it, because each of us have our own different standards. And so that's kind of an important thing, at least we feel.
And that's what a substrate is, right? It's the base cotton, the gray goods that it's printed on.
Yes, and so substrates are, I mentioned earlier, 60 by 60. In the chains, you'll see many, or a fabric shop, if you will, have many different other types of substrates. So a substrate is, as mentioned, 60 by 60 is one substrate. It's 100% cotton. You could have 68 by 68. We consider that, even though it's 100% cotton, it's a thinner thread, but it's also a different substrate. There are thousands of substrates. If it's not 100% cotton, you have poly blends, you have rayon blends, you have knits. There are literally so much to choose from, and so it's very.
Well, and a
go ahead,
poly
please.
cotton is something you might see a lot of in a chain. So
Yes.
let's talk about the difference between a poly blend, like a poly broadcloth, that's really common, versus quilting cotton.
Sure. Again, it's a cheaper product, first of all, because polyester is cheaper than cotton. Cotton is a natural, as you know, a natural plant and has to be processed, well as a filament of polyester is much cheaper to produce. And so it's still woven together, but it has different attributes. And first of all, a poly blend or a poly cotton, in order to dye both the cotton and the polyester is actually more expensive. So typically if a poly cotton blend is typically done with pigments again, and normally it's a lighter weight or a lighter not as deep of a color. But a poly, I don't think, and you'd have to help me a little bit because I don't quilt, that you wouldn't actually use a poly cotton with 100% cotton
You
on a
wouldn't
quilt.
want to. People
Right,
do.
Right, and they try to get by.
Yeah, they absolutely do. People use all kinds of things that they shouldn't use in quilts, like bed sheets for the back, but the thread count is totally different, and you're going to end up regretting it over time if you do that. But it's a really common thing that people do to try to save a buck, and it just, you know,
Yeah.
you really should stick with your quilt shop
Right.
fabric. But you mentioned rayon. Obviously, that is something that's used primarily in garments. Knit is used primarily in garments. You could get them in a quilt, but you have to do something special to the back of them.
Yep.
You need to put some sort of fusible stabilizer on it. Otherwise, it's going to stretch because you have a stretchy fabric next to something that holds its shape.
Yep.
But some other fabrics that you might find in a quilt shop that you could use in a quilt as well as garments. Voile is pretty popular. There are some of your 40 competitors. We'll print some on that, and it's a little bit thinner fabric and usually more expensive. But you can mix it in if you want to.
Okay.
But
There's also cotton lawn.
Yeah, cotton lawn is getting
also-
popular.
And that's a thinner
It is.
cotton also, and historically was linen at one time, and now it's 100% cotton. But you'll find it in shops, you'll find it by suppliers also here and there, but it's not as popular. And is it cheaper? Help me a
no,
little bit.
it's definitely more expensive.
Okay, it is.
So it drapes really well for garments. It is sold with quilting lines, and some of them where the substrate will be, you know, you'll have 12 that are quilting cotton, and then you'll have 2 lawns that are part of it. And so it's marketed all together in that case, but it's definitely more expensive. It's a little bit thinner, and it drapes really well for garments, but you could use it in quilting and it wouldn't like damage the quilt or anything like that. It's not like it wouldn't last as long with it. So what are some other things that people need to look for when they're at the quilt store and they're looking for fabric?
Sure. Good question.
I know what I...
You threw me on that one. Huh? What are you looking for?
Well, I know
please.
a lot of people, like obviously we're online and you can order from us online. And we promote that, absolutely. You should go check it out. But I only recommend ordering from shops that you either know are going to get that quilt shop quality cotton, or a brand that you have touched and felt in real life.
Okay.
Because that feel is so important. And there are so many people who even come in here and we're like, oh yeah, we're online too. And they're like, yeah, but I just like to touch it.
Yeah.
And that feel, like fondling fabric when you're in the quilt shop, is totally okay. It's totally fine.
So besides being,
Yeah.
sorry, what would you look for? To just looking at the color, that's only one aspect as you're mentioning.
absolutely.
But feeling it and holding it is critical. It just is, because that's the product that's going to be on at least some part of someone's body. If it's a baby quilt, obviously you want to make it have that hand, have that softness, and not to be so abrasive in a sense. And some also, you want to look at your quality. It's easy for me to say, but there's beyond color and saturation, you want to make sure the fabric is all in fit, if you want to call it. There aren't any misprints, you know, and I know that's probably a problem for you when you might have a little.
Occasionally we'll open a bolt and we'll be like, oh, well, that
that's
didn't work out
like
very
that.
well.
But other than that, I think color is the most important thing with for consumers.
Because you want it to last. You know, you've spent all this time, and you don't want it to fade or bleed when you wash it.
Right, and that's why the fabric that you have here in the shop is so much different than what's in the chains.
Oh, yeah.
And because you're paying a premium price to us, we owe it to you and your consumers to have the highest quality possible. And so for every printing, we have testing done for abrasiveness and for washability, wash fastness, light fastness. So we go through all the physical testings to ensure that that quilt or that fabric is going to look the same as long as possible. And that's our promise really to all consumers. So that's sort of behind the scenes. If your customers are coming into the shop, they're expecting 100% quality. You know, they don't want to have any flaws and they don't have those problems. But by coming in here, I know you stand behind your product, and if we ever ship something to you, or I'm sure all the other suppliers would offer you a credit, because some mistakes do happen. But make sure if you're coming into the shop, you want to take a look at every yard that you're buying.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and also with online, it's perfectly fine. That's kind of the way the world is going into online. But make sure you know and you trust that person that you're ordering from, because not all fabric is created equal, and you want to make sure that you have bought something from them before, or you know someone who has, and it's good quality, or you know that brand. You have sewn with it, you know it's a good quality. And then if you see someone else is stocking that, and they're stocking a lot of other brands that you also know and love, then you can probably be safe to say that, yeah, that's probably going to be okay for me to sew with.
Yes, because I'm sure you only bring in product into your shop and
that I love.
that you like, and right, and custom companies, suppliers that you trust.
There's so much available out there, so much. And a lot of times when I'm ordering, I can see and feel and touch the fabric. And so I know right away what it's going to feel like, and if that is good enough quality before I even order.
Right.
And so that's really important.
And so actually we're going through a major transition right now, because about 95%, at least 95% of the product you have here is on screen printing. And so the next evolution for printing is digital process. And digital printing is all the same. The finishing is all the same. The printing of the colorants and the dyes are all the same. The 60 by 60, 20 singles we call it, is all the same. And the preparation is about the only difference. If you're going to start feeling digital has what we call combed cotton, so it has even a softer feel, and it doesn't have the rigidity, or at least the textural of carded cotton. That's typically what you can actually feel a little bit of threading or the threads itself. But by digital, since it's now not forced on to the color, it's not forced on, it's sprayed in order to make it as smooth as possible and have the clarity that you really need for digital. It's just combed, that's all. So it's a little bit different. So, but something we're doing is QT. Our lines that we're just offering in April going forward, we're going to be 100% digital printing. We're going to maintain our same pricing, so we're not charging any more. So we're pretty proud to be, I think, the first company to go all digital.
It's
so
really
it's going to be kind of cool.
So one other thing that we order a lot from the Ink & Arrow sub-brand of QT fabrics, and one thing that I've noticed is the colors kind of all go together. Not that they all are in the same color palette, but from line to line you can kind of mix and match. So if you become a fan of, one kind of look, like this looks really good with some of the previous ones that we have, so you can kind of mix and match a little more. Is that kind of a conscious decision on your guys' part?
Sure, there's somewhat of a continuity that we try to employ going from season to season. And also something else that we embellish with is our in-stock program. We have over 700 SKUs that we have always in stock, and we utilize those SKUs as we're introducing new lines. As a recommendation.
A SKU is a fabric, by the way. This is one SKU for those of you who are not ordering for your shop.
So would they call it a pattern?
Yes, a fabric print or something.
Okay.
Do you have this specific fabric? Those are the questions I get.
Okay. So on that particular pattern, we have, since we have 700 other patterns, colors that could match, we make recommendations and we merchandise it together. So while this butterfly is one pattern that joins one line, we also have what we call blenders or basics that we can say, oh, that dark royal would match well with this in stock, or this aqua, this pink. And so if you buy that pink from us and you have it on your shelf, a season later, there'll be another SKU that has the pink. And so you can then utilize your investment.
Absolutely. Well, and the pixie dots, we have, I think, maybe one left in stock.
Wow.
Because people just really love them as blenders. They're great. They're this little, well, we might have a little glare on the camera.
It's a package.
So we have an entire quilt kit that uses the pixie dots, but people really like to use them as blenders. But we do have a fabric quilt, and we'll share an image of it where you can see them. But they're just modern dots. They're not like a circular dot, they're a square dot. And so from a distance, they kind of look like a solid, but then when you get closer, they have that texture to them. So it's really kind of fun. All right, well, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today. You flew all the way here just for this video.
Yes, I did. I just happened to be in the state. I
know.
let's just pop down.
Make it work. I'm his layover is what I am,
Yes,
which
yes,
is
you
really
are.
good. I thought they would send me my fabric wrap, and then when they told me you're sending you, I'm like, oh, you got the big guns today.
Big lead up, wasn't it?
Yes, for sure. So our next video, we're going to start showing you how to cut and how to sew accurately. So make sure you watch those next videos so that way you can learn how to quilt through this. I hope you've learned a lot about fabric and why it's important to go to your local quilt shop if you have one, or a reputable online retailer. The other thing we didn't really talk about is if you do have a local quilt shop in your area, they're a great resource to you. So if you have questions, they have very friendly staff. I've not met too many quilters who are not friendly, and they're happy to help you, but online is really just booming. We're of course always happy to help when you have questions online if we're your resource and you don't have somebody locally. But check that out. Make sure you download the pattern for Split 9 Patch. Just go to shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com and search for Split 9 Patch. We'll have a link in the bottom of the video as well. And you can get the pattern for free that we're going to be making a quilt from in this video tutorial series. And then we'll also send you a coupon code that you can use to get some good fabric for a little bit lesser price. So that way you can give this a go, try it out, and hopefully fall in love with it.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Happy quilting. QT Fabrics proudly sponsors this video tutorial series by Quilt Addicts Anonymous. Make sure you go check out their website at qtfabrics.com and join in the fabric fun they imagine so you can create.